At my 20-week ultrasound, I expected to hear the rhythmic swoosh of a heartbeat. Instead, I heard the terrifying sound of the door locking. My doctor turned to me, her face pale as a sheet, and whispered, "You need to leave your husband immediately." I thought she was crazy until she showed me what was actually inside the prenatal vitamins he insisted on feeding me every morning. What I saw inside that capsule made my blood run cold and turned my perfect marriage into a crime scene. My name is Brianna King, and at 32 years old, I thought I was living the Atlanta dream. I had a wealthy real estate developer husband, a mansion in Buckhead, and a baby on the way. But I never guessed that the man sleeping next to me was plotting my funeral. Before I dive into this nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever trusted someone who turned out to be your worst enemy. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when my life shattered. I was lying on the sterile examination table at Dr. Helen Wu's private clinic. Helen was not just my obstetrician, she was an old friend of my late father and one of the few people in this city I truly trusted with my life. I watched her scan the monitor, waiting for her to point out tiny fingers or toes, but the room remained terrifyingly silent. Helen stopped moving the transducer over my stomach. She wiped the gel off my skin with a trembling hand and stood up abruptly. I smiled nervously and asked, "Is everything okay, Helen? Is the baby hiding again?" She did not smile back. Instead, she walked over to the door and clicked the deadbolt shut. The metallic click echoed loudly in the small room. My heart began to race. "Helen, you are scaring me," I said, struggling to sit up. She turned the monitor screen toward me. I squinted, expecting to see a grainy ultrasound image. Instead, it was a series of charts and red warning bars. "That is not the baby," Helen said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "That is your toxicology report from the blood draw we did 20 minutes ago. Brianna, your kidneys are functioning at 60%. Your blood contains levels of mercury and lead that I usually only see in industrial accident victims." I stared at her, confused and defensive. "That is impossible," I stammered. "I eat organic. I do yoga. I take the expensive vitamins Darius buys me from that exclusive naturopath every single morning." Helen's eyes narrowed immediately. "The purple ones?" she asked. "The capsules he keeps in the glass jar by the coffee maker?" I nodded. Helen reached into the pocket of her lab coat. She pulled out a small plastic bag containing one of those familiar purple capsules. She must have taken it from my purse while I was changing into the gown. She placed the pill on the metal tray and grabbed a surgical scalpel. "Watch closely," she commanded. She sliced the capsule open. Instead of oil or powder, a gritty gray substance spilled out. It smelled metallic and wrong. "This is not a prenatal vitamin." "Brianna," she said, grabbing my shoulders with an intensity I had never seen before. "This is poison. It is slow-acting and cumulative. Darius is not taking care of you. He is killing you. And if you go back to that house tonight, neither you nor this baby will survive the week. You need to file for divorce now, but first we need to get you out of here alive." I spent the next hour preparing a simple dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables. I needed to keep my hands busy to stop them from shaking. Just as I set the table, the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. Darius sprang up from the couch with an enthusiasm I had not seen in months. I should have known. Standing in the doorway was Tiffany Miller King, my brother-in-law's wife. Tiffany breezed in like she owned the place, her heels clicking loudly on my hardwood floors. She was wearing a white designer dress that probably cost more than my first car. She looked me up and down with that fake sweetness that always made my skin crawl. "Oh, Brianna," she said, wrinkling her nose as she looked at the dinner table. "Are you really eating that? It smells so heavy. No wonder your blood pressure is up. You know, you people really need to watch your cholesterol more than we do. It is just biology." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Darius laughed as if she had just told a charming joke. "Come on, Tiffany, be nice," he said, but his eyes were glued to her. He pulled out a chair for her, leaving me to sit down by myself. Tiffany reached for the bottle of expensive Pinot Noir that Darius had opened to breathe. She poured herself a generous glass without asking. "So how is the pregnancy treating you?" she asked, swirling the wine glass dangerously close to me. "You look absolutely exhausted. I mean, look at those bags under your eyes. Are you sure you are sleeping enough? Maybe you should take something for that." "I am fine, Tiffany," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just have a lot on my mind." She smirked. "Well, do not stress too much. It is bad for the baby." Suddenly she lunged forward as if she had tripped. The entire glass of red wine splashed onto my white maternity dress. The cold liquid soaked through to my skin, looking like a gruesome wound across my stomach. "Oh my God!" Tiffany shrieked, covering her mouth with a perfectly manicured hand. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry, Brianna." I stood up so fast my chair scrapped against the floor. "You did that on purpose," I snapped. Darius slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, Brianna," he yelled. "It was an accident. Look at her, she feels terrible. Why do you have to be so aggressive all the time? Go upstairs and change. You are ruining dinner." I looked from Darius to Tiffany. She was not looking at me. She was looking at him with a pouty, apologetic expression that was completely staged. And in that moment, as the red wine dripped onto the floor, I saw it. On her neck, glistening under the chandelier light, was a diamond necklace with the initials D and B intertwined. It was the custom necklace Darius had told me was stolen from our bedroom last month. He had not lost it. He had given it to her. I turned around and walked out of the room without another word, leaving my husband with his mistress. I washed the residue of the toxic smoothie from my mouth and tried to compose myself. I had to play the role of the dutiful wife for just a few more hours. I went to the kitchen and started chopping vegetables for dinner, the rhythmic sound of the knife hitting the cutting board, helping to steady my racing heart. I prepared roasted chicken with collard greens and sweet potatoes, a recipe my grandmother had taught me. It was comfort food, and I desperately needed comfort. Just as I was taking the roasting pan out of the oven, the front doorbell chimed. I froze. We were not expecting guests. I heard Darius jog to the door, his footsteps heavy and eager. A moment later, a high-pitched, overly enthusiastic voice drifted into the kitchen. It was Tiffany Miller King, my brother-in-law's wife. My stomach clenched. Tiffany was a woman who smiled with her mouth, but never with her eyes. She had always treated me like a charity case that the King family had unfortunately acquired. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked into the dining room just as they entered. Tiffany was wearing a white silk dress that looked ridiculous for a rainy Tuesday night. She breezed past me without a hug, offering only a vague wave. "Oh, hey, Brianna," she said, sniffing the air theatrically. She wrinkled her nose as if she smelled garbage. "Wow, it smells very intense in here. Are you cooking that soul food again?" I forced a smile, gripping the back of a dining chair. "It is just roasted chicken and greens, Tiffany," I said calmly. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Right. Greens. I keep telling Darius that you need to be careful with all that grease and salt. You know how susceptible your people are to heart disease and diabetes. It is just genetics, I guess, but you really should try to eat cleaner. Like us." I looked at Darius, expecting him to defend me or at least change the subject. Instead, he was pouring Tiffany a glass of vintage red wine, grinning like a schoolboy. "Tiffany is just looking out for you, babe," he said, handing her the crystal goblet. "She reads a lot of health blogs. You could learn a thing or so." We sat down to eat. Tiffany picked at her food, moving the chicken around her plate with surgical disdain. She spent the entire meal talking about her new interior design business, which I knew was failing, and how she planned to renovate her summer home. I stayed silent, focusing on my water. I did not trust anything else on that table. "So Brianna," Tiffany said, suddenly turning her attention to me. "You look huge. Are you sure it is just one baby in there? Maybe you should cut back on the carbs." "I am 8 months pregnant." "Tiffany," I replied, my patience fraying. "It is normal to gain weight. She smirked and reached across the table for the salt shaker, her movement unnecessarily wide and dramatic. As her arm passed over my lap, her hand jerked. The entire glass of red wine tipped over. The dark crimson liquid splashed directly onto my beige maternity dress, soaking through the fabric instantly. It looked like a gunshot wound spreading across my stomach. Oops, Tiffany squealed, not sounding sorry at all. She brought a manicured hand to her mouth in mock horror. Oh my God, I am so clumsy today. I stood up, shaking the wine off my hands, trembling with rage. You did that on purpose, I whispered. Darius slammed his fork down. Seriously, Brianna, he snapped, glaring at me. It was an accident. Why do you always have to be so dramatic? Look at poor Tiffany, she is terrified. You are the one who is clumsy. You probably bumped the table. Go clean yourself up and stop ruining the evening. I looked at my husband, the father of my child, and saw nothing but contempt in his eyes. He was not just siding with her. He was enjoying my humiliation. I looked at Tiffany. She was dabbing her dry eyes with a napkin, hiding a smirk. In that moment, the dynamic was clear. I was the outsider. They were the team. I turned and walked toward the stairs, the wet fabric clinging to my skin, knowing that the next time I sat at this table, I would be the one holding the gavel. I grabbed a roll of paper towels and a bottle of stain remover from the kitchen, forcing myself to return to the dining room. I could not let them see me crumble. As I knelt down to blot the red wine from the expensive Persian rug, Tiffany remained seated, swirling the remaining liquid in her glass. She did not offer to help. Instead, she leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, watching me scrub the floor, like I was the hired help. You missed a spot there, Brianna, she said, pointing with a perfectly manicured finger. As she leaned in the neckline of her silk dress, draped open slightly. That was when the chandelier light caught it, a diamond pendant resting against her collarbone. My breath hitched. It was a custom piece, a platinum infinity symbol, intertwined with two small hearts. I knew every millimeter of that necklace because I had designed it myself for our 5th anniversary. Darius had told me it vanished from my jewelry box 3 weeks ago. He had even filed a police report claiming a maid must have stolen it. He had looked me in the eye and lied, and now that lie was sparkling around the neck of the woman trying to destroy me. I froze my hand, hovering over the wine stain. That is a stunning necklace, Tiffany, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I have never seen you wear it before. Tiffany touched the diamonds instinctively, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she masked it with a smug smile. Oh, this old thing, she said, laughing nervously. Marcus gave it to me for my birthday last week. He has such good taste, does he not? Marcus, my brother-in-law, a man who is currently unemployed and borrowing money from us to pay his rent. There was no way he bought a $10,000 custom necklace. It was a lie so lazy it was insulting. It looks familiar. I pressed, standing up slowly to look her in the eye. It looks exactly like the one Darius gave me. The one that was stolen. The room went deadly silent. Darius stopped chewing his steak. He looked from me to Tiffany, his jaw tightening. Do not be ridiculous, Brianna, he snapped, standing up. Designs get copied all the time. Are you accusing my sister-in-law of theft? I am not accusing anyone, I said, gripping the spray bottle until my knuckles turned white. I am just observing. But if I looked closely at the clasp, I bet I would find the initials D and B engraved on the back. Unless Marcus decided to engrave my husband's initials on your gift. Tiffany stood up too, clutching her purse. I think I should go, she said, her voice trembling with fake victimhood. I do not feel comfortable being interrogated over my jewelry. No, stay, Darius insisted, glaring at me. Brianna is just hormonal. She gets paranoid when she is off her meds. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. Go upstairs, Brianna. Now. I looked at the necklace one last time. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was my identity he was giving away. He wasn't just having an affair. He was stripping me of my life piece by piece and draping it over another woman. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, not with fear but with a terrifying clarity. He had crossed the line from unfaithful husband to active enemy. And as I climbed the stairs, I knew one thing for certain. I was not going to cry myself to sleep. I was going to open his safe. I lay in the dark for what felt like an eternity, listening to the rhythm of the rain against the window pane and the heavy, congested breathing of the man beside me. Darius had fallen into a deep sleep, likely aided by the 3 glasses of scotch he consumed after Tiffany left. Every time he shifted, my heart hammered against my ribs, terrified he would wake up and see that my eyes were wide open, but he didn't. At 2 in the morning, the house was finally silent. This was my window. I slipped out from under the heavy duvet, moving centimeter by centimeter. My bare feet touched the cold plush carpet and I held my breath, waiting for a reaction. Nothing. I grabbed my robe but didn't put it on, fearful the rustling fabric would make too much noise. Instead, I crept into the hallway like a ghost in my own home. My destination was the mahogany-paneled study on the first floor, the one room Darius had forbidden me from entering without knocking. He claimed it was because of client confidentiality. Now I knew it was to hide his crimes. The door to the study squeaked faintly as I pushed it open, a sound that roared like a gunshot in the silence. I froze, counting to 10. When no one stirred, I slipped inside and closed the door, engaging the lock. I didn't dare turn on the main lights. I used the flashlight on my phone, keeping the beam low and focused. I went straight to the large abstract painting hanging behind his desk. It was a pretentious piece he had bought at an auction, but its real purpose was to conceal the wall safe. I swung the painting aside, revealing the cold steel face of the safe. My father, a man who believed paranoia was just another word for preparedness, had taught me how to read a keypad when I was a teenager. He used to say that people are creatures of habit. They press the same buttons so often that they leave a map for anyone paying attention. I pulled a small travel bottle of baby powder from my pocket, something I had grabbed from the nursery earlier. I squeezed a fine cloud of white powder over the black keys, then blew gently. The excess dust drifted away, leaving the keys clean except for 4 of them. The numbers 158 and 9 were coated in a faint greasy residue, where the oil from Darius's fingertips had trapped the powder. 4 numbers. A birth year. 1985. It was pathetic how predictable he was. I punched in the code, my finger trembling slightly on the last digit. The light blinked green. With a mechanical whir, the heavy door clicked unlock. I pulled the handle and the door swung open. I expected to see stacks of cash, maybe the emergency fund we had agreed to keep in cash. Instead, the safe was a chaotic mess of crumpled papers. I reached in and pulled out the top stack. My stomach dropped. They weren't assets. They were threats. Letter after letter from places with names like the Velvet Chip and Diamond River Casino. They were final notices, past due warnings, threats of legal action, and vague menacing notes handwritten in red ink. Payment due by Friday or we collect in person. I did the math quickly in my head. He didn't just owe money, he was underwater by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Darius wasn't a wealthy developer. He was a broke gambler playing a dangerous game with dangerous people. And suddenly his desperation to get rid of me made terrifying financial sense. I pushed aside the crumbling evidence of his gambling addiction, my hands trembling slightly. Beneath the chaotic pile of final notices and threats from loan sharks lay a crisp navy blue folder. It looked disturbingly organized compared to the mess above it. I opened it, and the logo of a major insurance firm stared back at me. The policy date was from just 14 days ago. I scanned the document, the legal jargon blurring before my eyes, until I found the numbers. The coverage amount was staggering. $5 million. My heart hammered against my ribs. $5 million payable to the primary beneficiary, Darius King, upon the death of the insured Brianna King. But it was the rider clause on page 3 that made the bile rise in my throat. It specified an expedited double payout if the insured passed away due to sudden medical complications during childbirth or surgical procedures related to labor. Suddenly, the toxic smoothies, the spiked soup, and the dangerous vitamins made perfect, horrific sense. Darius did not just want me out of the way so he could play house with Tiffany. He needed me to die on the delivery table so he could cash out. He was literally betting on my death to cover his losses at the blackjack table. I was not his wife anymore. I was his winning lottery ticket. I flipped to the signature page. There in blue ink was my name, Brianna Vance King. It looked almost perfect to the untrained eye. He had copied the slant of my handwriting the way I crossed my T's. But I knew better. The loop on the B was too tight. The K was too sharp. I had never seen this document in my life. Darius had forged my signature, likely practicing for hours while I slept unsuspectingly in the next room. He had committed a felony to facilitate a murder. The sheer calculation of it was paralyzing. He had planned this down to the week. The debt collectors were closing in, demanding payment by the end of the month. My due date was in 3 weeks. He was timing my death to align with his financial deadline. I took out my phone and snapped high-resolution photos of every single page, ensuring the policy number, the dates, and the forged signature were clearly visible. I placed the folder back exactly where I found it, sandwiched between a threatening letter from a casino known for breaking kneecaps and a deed to a property he had likely already lost. As I closed the heavy steel door of the safe and reset the painting, a cold realization settled over me. I had come down here looking for a reason to divorce him. Instead, I found the blueprint for my execution. My husband was not just a bad man. He was a desperate one. And a desperate man is capable of anything. I was living with a monster who saw my unborn child not as a son, but as a biological timer for a payout. I crept back upstairs knowing that I could not just leave. If I left now, he would find another way to kill me for that policy. I had to stay and destroy the policy and him from the inside. I placed the insurance policy aside, my heart already racing, but my instincts told me I was not done. I reached for the thick leather binder sitting at the very bottom of the safe. My hands recognized the texture immediately. It was the original property portfolio for this estate, the one my grandmother had passed down to me on her deathbed. This house was not just a building. It was a symbol of 3 generations of hard work and resilience. When I married Darius, he convinced me to sign a power of attorney document. He claimed it was to protect me from the stress of property taxes and maintenance. He said he wanted to be the man of the house and take care of everything. I believed him. Now, as I opened the binder, I realized I had essentially handed a burglar the keys to my vault. The first page was a foreclosure notice stamped in aggressive red ink. Notice of default. My breath hitched in my throat. This house, which I owned free and clear before our marriage, was now drowning in debt. Darius had taken out a second mortgage, then a third. He had leveraged every brick and beam of my legacy to borrow over $2 million. According to the letter from the bank, we were 30 days away from the sheriff arriving to evict us. I flipped through the bank statements attached to the foreclosure notice, desperate to see where the money had gone. It was not gambling debts this time, it was worse. The wire transfers were frequent and massive. 50,000 here, 100,000 there, all funneled into a business account labeled Serenity Spa Ventures. My stomach turned over. Serenity Spa was Tiffany's passion project. It was a high-end wellness center she had launched 2 years ago in downtown Atlanta. She had bragged about how successful it was, how she was a self-made female entrepreneur. It was all a lie. My husband had drained my inheritance to fund his mistress's failure. He was bankrolling her lifestyle, her renovations, and her fake success with the equity from my grandmother's home. I looked at the dates. The foreclosure deadline coincided exactly with my due date. The math was terrifyingly simple. Darius needed the $5 million from my life insurance policy, not just to pay off the loan sharks, but to save this house before the bank seized it. If I lived, he would lose everything. The house, the money, and Tiffany. If I died, he would be the grieving widower who heroically paid off the debts and raised our son with the help of his supportive sister-in-law. I took photos of every transfer receipt, making sure to capture the account numbers linking Darius to Tiffany's business. My hands were shaking not from fear anymore, but from a cold, calculating fury. He had stolen my past to pay for her future. I carefully arranged the papers back in the safe, ensuring the edges aligned perfectly so he would not suspect they had been touched. I closed the heavy steel door and spun the dial. As I stood up in the dark office, I realized something important. Darius thought he was running out of time, but he had no idea that I was the one holding the stopwatch now. I crept back to the bedroom, my mind racing. I needed to hear their next move. I needed that wiretap in his car to work. I waited until the shower was running in the master bathroom before I made my move. With my heart pounding against my ribs, I ran out to the driveway in my bathrobe. The morning air was cold and damp. I slid into the back seat of Darius's black Escalade and reached under the driver's seat. The magnetic GPS tracker and listening device I had bought with cash yesterday clicked into place against the metal frame. It took less than 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 hours. I sprinted back inside and was sitting on the bed reading a book by the time Darius walked out of the bathroom smelling of expensive soap and deceit. He kissed my forehead, gave me a lingering look that I now knew was him, checking for signs of kidney failure, and left for his so-called business meetings. As soon as the front door closed, I locked myself in the guest bedroom and opened the surveillance app on my phone. The audio feed connected instantly. I heard the engine start, the radio hum, and then the sound of a phone dialing. "Hey, baby." Darius's voice filled my headphones. It was warm and affectionate, a tone he hadn't used with me in years. A female voice answered immediately. It was Tiffany. She didn't sound happy. "Is she dead yet, Darius?" "I am serious. I saw her yesterday and she looked fine. She looked healthy." "Relax, Tiff," Darius soothed. "The doctor said the cumulative effect takes time. Her kidneys are already failing. 1 more week and her body will give out during labor. It will look like eclampsia. The insurance company won't even blink." I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. Hearing him discuss my murder so casually, like it was a business transaction, made me want to vomit. But what Tiffany said next froze the blood in my veins. "I do not have a week, Darius," she hissed. "I am showing. I can't keep wearing these baggy sweaters. People are going to start asking questions. My belly is getting big." My breath hitched. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, praying I had misunderstood. "Babe, listen to me," Darius said. "Once she is gone and we have the 5 million, we can move to Europe. We will raise our twins in Paris just like we planned. No one will know the timeline. They will just think we comforted each other in our grief." Twins. Tiffany was pregnant with twins. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Darius wasn't just killing me for money, he was killing me to replace me. He had a whole new family waiting in the wings, a replacement wife and replacement children funded by my death and my grandmother's fortune. He had impregnated his brother's wife, and now he was going to sacrifice his own unborn son with me to secure a future for his children with her. I ripped the headphones off and threw them across the room. I screamed into a pillow until my throat was raw. The betrayal was absolute. There was no shred of humanity left in him. I sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, holding my stomach. He wanted to erase us, but he had made a fatal error. He thought he was the only one with a plan. He didn't know that the fat cow he was mocking had just recorded his full confession. I wiped my tears. No more crying. It was time to introduce him to the new Brianna. I had barely processed the recording of my husband plotting my murder when the front door slammed open. The sound of heavy luggage wheels rolling across the hardwood floor echoed through the house like the rumble of an approaching tank. I walked to the landing and looked down. Standing in my foyer, surrounded by 3 massive Louis Vuitton suitcases, was Mama Louise, my mother-in-law. She was a small woman, but her presence sucked the oxygen out of any room. She wore a fur coat despite the Atlanta humidity, and a hat so wide it barely fit through the door. She looked up, her eyes narrowing behind her oversized sunglasses as she spotted me. "Brianna," she called out, her voice dripping with fake concern that barely masked her disdain. Darius told me you were bedridden. Why are you standing up? You are risking my grandson's life. I gripped the banister. Hello, Louise, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I did not know you were coming. She waved a hand dismissively and began barking orders at the Uber driver to bring in her vanity case. Of course I am here. Darius is worried sick. He says you are unstable. Someone needs to make sure this baby survives your incompetence. She walked up the stairs, ignoring my outstretched hand, and brushed past me into the master bedroom. I followed her, panic rising in my chest. What are you doing? I asked. I am moving in until the birth, she announced, throwing her coat onto my bed. Someone has to manage this household. It is filthy in here. If Darius had married Veronica, this house would be spotless. Veronica knew how to treat a man. She was a real woman, not a fragile little thing like you. Veronica was Darius's high school sweetheart, a woman Mama Louise had never stopped mourning. I watched as she marched into my bathroom and started opening cabinets. She was looking for something. Hey, that is private, I said, stepping forward. She ignored me. She reached into the medicine cabinet and pulled out the bottle of organic prenatal vitamins I had secretly bought that morning to replace the poisoned ones. She looked at the label with disgust. What is this garbage? She spat. Those are my vitamins, I said. Trash, she declared. She walked to the toilet and dumped the entire bottle of expensive safe pills into the water. She flushed before I could even move. You do not buy cheap drugstore pills when you are carrying a king baby. Darius spent a fortune on the custom blend from his specialist. You will take what he gives you. She reached into her vanity case and pulled out the familiar glass jar filled with the purple toxic capsules. She slammed it down on the counter. From now on, I will watch you take these every single morning. We cannot trust you to do even the simplest thing right. I stared at the purple pills, then at the toilet where my only lifeline had just disappeared. Mama Louise turned to me, a cold shark-like smile spreading across her face. Now go downstairs and make me some tea. And do not put too much sugar in it. We do not want you getting diabetes on top of everything else. I walked out of the bathroom, my legs feeling like lead. Darius had brought in reinforcements. I was no longer just living with a murderer. I was living with his warden. And now I had no way to fake taking my medicine. I had to think of a new plan and fast, because Mama Louise was going to be watching my every swallow. Living with Mama Louise was like being trapped in a pressure cooker with a malfunctioning valve. For the next 2 days, she hovered over me like a vulture waiting for a carcass to cool. She took over my kitchen, banishing me from the stove, claiming that my cooking was too modern and lacked the nutrients a king heir required. But on the third evening, the dynamic shifted from annoying to deadly. I was sitting at the kitchen island, watching her stir a pot of thick, dark broth. The steam rising from it carried a strange, heavy scent. Dinner is ready, she announced, slamming a porcelain bowl in front of me. It was filled with a murky brown liquid that looked more like swamp water than soup. Eat up, she commanded, standing over me with her arms crossed. This is a traditional recipe from Darius's great-grandmother. It strengthens the womb. I looked down at the bowl. My instincts were screaming at me to run. I picked up the spoon, slowly stirring the liquid. As the steam hit my face, I smelled it. Beneath the overwhelming odor of burnt garlic and onions, there was a faint, sickly sweet scent. Bitter almonds. My father had been a fan of crime novels, and I had read enough of them to know that the smell of bitter almonds was often associated with cyanide. It was a low dose, likely masked by the heavy spices, but the scent was unmistakable to someone who was already on high alert. I am not really hungry, Louise, I said, pushing the bowl slightly away. My stomach is feeling a bit unsettled today. Her eyes narrowed. You will eat it, Brianna. You are too skinny. My grandson needs sustenance, not your excuses. Pick up the spoon. Just then, Tiffany walked into the kitchen through the back door, carrying her prize-winning white Persian cat Duchess. Tiffany often brought the cat over because her apartment building was being fumigated. She set Duchess down on the floor and walked to the fridge to get a water bottle. Oh, is that the special soup? Tiffany asked, glancing at my bowl. Mama Louise nodded curtly. Duchess the cat trotted over to my stool, purring and rubbing her fluffy white body against my legs. A plan formed in my mind instantly. It was risky, but I needed to know if I was paranoid, or if I was right. I lifted the spoon to my lips, feigning a sudden hand spasm. Oops! I cried out, letting the heavy ceramic bowl slip from my fingers. It crashed onto the tiled floor, shattering instantly. The hot brown liquid splashed everywhere, pooling around the legs of the stool. "You clumsy fool," Mama Louise shrieked, grabbing a towel. "Look what you have done!" Before she could wipe it up, Duchess, attracted by the warmth and the smell of meat, lapped up a few quick tongues full of the soup. "No, Duchess," Tiffany yelled, turning around. But it was too late. The reaction was almost immediate. The cat let out a high-pitched yowl that sounded human. Her small body stiffened, and she fell onto her side legs, twitching violently. Foam began to bubble around her mouth. "Oh my God!" Tiffany screamed, dropping her water bottle. "Duchess!" I looked at Mama Louise. Her face had drained of all color. She was not looking at the cat with sadness. She was looking at the spilled soup with terror. She knew exactly what was in there. "Call the vet!" I yelled, standing up. "Tiffany, we need to get her to a hospital." "No!" Mama Louise shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. She grabbed Tiffany's arm. "Do not call anyone. It is just an allergic reaction to the onions. Cats cannot eat onions." The cat gave one final violent shudder and went still. The kitchen fell into a horrified silence. Tiffany was sobbing, kneeling beside her dead pet. I looked at my mother-in-law. A vet would run a toxicology screen. A vet would find the poison. That was why she would not let us call. "You killed her," Mama Louise hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "If you had just eaten your dinner like a good wife, this innocent animal would still be alive. You are a curse on this family, Brianna." I looked at the dead cat, then at the woman who had just tried to feed that same soup to me and her unborn grandson. "I am so sorry, Louise," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I guess I really am clumsy. I will go clean myself up." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them with the body. I did not need a lab report anymore. I had my proof. And now I knew that the baby shower this weekend was going to be their final attempt to finish the job. The silence in the house following the death of Tiffany's cat was heavy and suffocating. You would think that killing a family pet would pause their plans, but desperation has a way of accelerating evil. The very next morning, Tiffany was back at our breakfast table, her eyes dry and her ambition restored. She placed a manicured hand on my arm, her touch cold and predatory. "You know what we need?" she chirped, looking at Darius and Mama Louise for confirmation. "We need to clear this negative energy. We need to move forward with the baby shower. And we should do it this Saturday at my place." I put down my fork. Saturday was 2 days away. "This Saturday?" I asked. "That seems very soon. I have not sent out any invitations." "Oh, do not worry about that." Tiffany smiled, revealing teeth that looked too white and too sharp. "I have already invited everyone. It will be an intimate gathering. Just close friends and family. And we will host it by the pool. The weather is supposed to be beautiful, and the marble patio has just been polished. It will be perfect for photos." My internal alarm bells began to ring so loudly I could barely hear her. A pool party for a woman who was 8 months pregnant, on a marble patio that had just been polished. It was not a party venue, it was a death trap. They were setting the stage for a slip-and-fall accident. It was the perfect cover. A clumsy pregnant woman loses her footing on wet tile, hits her head, or falls into the water and drowns before anyone notices. It would be tragic, it would be accidental, and it would trigger the double indemnity clause in the insurance policy perfectly. I looked at Darius. He was watching me closely, waiting for me to refuse so he could call me difficult or paranoid. I forced a smile onto my face, masking the hatred burning in my chest. "That sounds lovely, Tiffany," I said. "A pool party is exactly what I need to relax. Darius exhaled, a sound of relief escaping his lips. "Great," he said. "I will make sure everything is safe for you, babe." I went upstairs to prepare. I did not choose my outfit based on fashion. I chose it based on war. I selected a sturdy pair of flats with rubber soles for grip. Then I opened a small box hidden in the back of my sock drawer. Inside was a tiny, high-definition camera, disguised as a black button. I sewed it onto the front of my cardigan, replacing the second button from the top. It would have a perfect view of anyone standing in front of me. I checked the feed on my phone. The image was crystal clear. If Tiffany or Darius tried to push me, if they tried to spike my drink, or if they tried to stage an accident, the world would see it in 4K resolution. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was not walking into a celebration. I was walking into an ambush. But this time, the victim was coming armed. I grabbed my purse and headed downstairs. It was showtime. Saturday arrived with a humidity that stuck to your skin like a bad reputation. I stepped out onto Tiffany's pool deck, the sunlight blindingly bright against the white marble. My rubber-soled shoes squeaked faintly, a stark contrast to the click of stilettos that echoed around me. Tiffany had transformed her backyard into a page out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. There were white orchids everywhere, a jazz band playing softly in the corner, and a banner that said, "Baby King" in gold cursive. But as I scanned the crowd, I did not see warmth. I saw a shark tank. The guests were a curated collection of Atlanta's social climbers, the kind of people who leased Bentleys to drive to the grocery store. They held flutes of champagne, their wrists weighed down by gold and diamonds that flashed aggressively in the sun. As I walked in, the conversation died down, replaced by whispers behind manicured hands. I knew what they were saying. "Look at her. Look how tired she is. Look at that cheap dress." Tiffany detached herself from a group of women and glided toward me. She was wearing a fitted silk gown that looked more bridal than host-like. "Oh, here she is," Tiffany announced, her voice pitching up an octave. "Everyone, the guest of honor has finally arrived." She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin slightly. "You look so comfortable, Brianna. It is so brave of you to dress down for your own party. I guess when you are that pregnant, you just give up on trying, right?" Her friends erupted in polite, cruel laughter. One of them, a woman named Chantal, who was wearing a diamond choker thick enough to be a dog collar, stepped forward. "You poor thing," Chantal said, tilting her head. "No jewelry today, Brie. Did Darius forget your anniversary, or did you have to sell it to pay the electric bill?" "I heard the real estate market is tough right now." I touched the button on my cardigan, ensuring the camera lens was unobstructed. I looked at Chantal, really looked at her. To anyone else, she was a wealthy socialite. But to me, she was file number 409. My holding company had purchased a bundle of distressed small business loans last week. Chantal's husband's construction firm was at the top of that list. They had not made a payment in 4 months. The diamond choker around her neck was technically mine. "I prefer to keep things simple, Chantal," I said, my voice steady. "Ostentatious displays of wealth are usually a sign of overcompensation, don't you think?" Chantal's smile faltered. Tiffany stepped in quickly, sensing the tension. "Well, we are just glad you made it. Come sit by the pool. We have a special chair set up for you right at the edge. The view is spectacular." I followed her gaze. They had placed a single wicker chair dangerously close to the deep end of the pool. The marble around it looked unusually shiny, as if someone had recently applied a fresh coat of wax or oil. It was a stage set for a tragedy. I looked around the circle of faces. Mr. Henderson, who was dodging tax evasion charges. Mrs. Gable, whose boutique was facing bankruptcy. They all smirked at me, thinking I was the failure in the room. They had no idea that the woman in the sensible shoes and the cardigan could foreclose on half of them with a single phone call. I walked toward the chair not as a victim but as a judge entering the courtroom. I was not just a guest. I was the repo man, and today I was collecting evidence. Tiffany sashayed toward me, balancing a silver tray with 2 tall condensation-slicked glasses. The liquid inside was a vibrant, innocent-looking ruby red garnished with fresh mint and blackberries. It looked refreshing, but I knew better. To the untrained eye, the glasses were identical, but I noticed the subtle difference immediately. The glass on the left had a tiny chip on the rim, a microscopic imperfection that she had likely used to mark the one laced with the uterine stimulant. "Here is your special nutrient blend, Brianna," she announced, her voice pitching up for the benefit of the crowd. "It is organic cranberry and raspberry. Great for circulation." She placed the chipped glass in front of me on the small wicker table and set her own glass, which smelled of vodka and expensive champagne, right next to it. Before I could reach for it, Tiffany pulled out her phone. "Wait, do not drink yet," she squealed. "I promised my followers a live update." She tapped the screen, and the familiar chime of a live stream starting echoed in the air. "Hey guys," she cooed into the camera, turning her back to me to find the best lighting. "We are live at the Baby King shower. Look at this gorgeous setup." She was distracted. Her entire world had narrowed down to the 6-inch screen in her hand. This was the moment. My heart rate slowed. My father had not just been a lawyer. He paid his way through school performing magic in dive bars. He taught me that the hand is quicker than the eye, especially when the eye is looking at itself. He called this move the ghost shift. While Tiffany was busy reading comments out loud and pouting for her digital audience, blocking the table from the view of the other guests, with her body I made my move. It was fluid and silent. With my left hand I picked up her glass. With my right I slid the poisoned glass into its place. The entire swap took less than a second. The condensation rings on the glass table were the only witnesses. Tiffany spun back around, breathless from her performance. "Okay, let's make a toast," she beamed, still holding the phone up to record us. "To the future of the King family." She reached down without looking and grabbed the glass sitting in her spot. The glass with the chip on the rim. The glass she had prepared for me. "To the future," I echoed, lifting the safe glass of vodka and juice. Tiffany clinked her glass against mine hard enough to make a ringing sound. She tilted her head back and took a massive gulp, draining nearly half the liquid. I watched the muscles in her throat work, swallowing the chemical weapon she had designed to kill my son. I brought my glass to my lips, letting the liquid touch them, but not drinking a drop. So refreshing," she sighed, wiping her mouth. She looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to clutch my stomach or complain of cramps. "How is yours, Brianna?" I smiled, a genuine cold smile. "It tastes exactly like I expected, Tiffany. Surprising." She laughed, thinking I was making a joke. She had no idea that she had just ingested a massive dose of misoprostol. She thought she was the director of this play, but she had just written herself out of the script. I set my glass down, checked the time on my watch, and waited. It would take about 20 minutes for her body to realize what she had done, and when it happened, I would be ready with a towel. Not to help her, but to keep my shoes clean. The jazz band was playing a soft, upbeat tune, but the rhythm of the party was about to shatter. Tiffany was in the middle of a sentence, bragging to her live stream about the imported white orchids, when her face suddenly went gray. The hand holding the phone began to tremble violently. She gasped, dropping the device onto the hard marble patio. It landed screen up, the camera still broadcasting everything to her thousands of followers. "My stomach," she whimpered, clutching her midsection. "It feels like a knife." Before anyone could react, a violent spasm seized her body. She doubled over her high heels, slipping on the freshly polished surface she had intended for me. Her arms flailed, seeking purchase on the air, but there was nothing to grab. With a terrified shriek, Tiffany toppled backward. She hit the water with a massive splash, sinking like a stone in her heavy silk gown. The guests gasped, rushing to the edge. But what they saw made the gasp turn into a collective scream. As Tiffany thrashed in the water, a dark crimson ribbon began to unfurl from her dress, staining the pristine turquoise water red. The uterine stimulant was working faster and more violently than even I had anticipated. Darius, who had been chatting with a business associate near the bar, turned at the sound of the splash. When he saw the blood in the water, his mask of composure completely disintegrated. He did not look at me. He did not check on his wife. He sprinted toward the pool with a desperation that was terrifying to witness. "Tiffany," he roared, diving into the water fully clothed. He reached her in seconds, grabbing her flailing body and hauling her toward the steps. She was sobbing hysterical, clutching her stomach. "My baby," she screamed. Ideally, she would have said "my baby," and people would assume she meant her nephew or niece. But Darius, in his blind panic, destroyed their entire charade with 5 words. "Do not die on me," he yelled, dragging her onto the wet concrete. "Someone call 911. Help me save my son. Save my boy." The music stopped. The chatter ceased. The only sound was Tiffany's wailing and Darius's heavy breathing. He was cradling her, his hand resting possessively on her stomach, oblivious to the 50 people staring at him. Mrs. Gable, the town gossip, stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Darius, did you just say your son? I thought Brianna was carrying your son." Darius froze. The adrenaline began to recede, replaced by the cold dread of realization. He looked up, water dripping from his face, and saw the wall of shocked faces. Then his eyes found mine. I was still sitting in my wicker chair, dry, calm, and holding my unpoisoned drink. I pointed a finger toward Tiffany's phone, which was still lying on the ground, the livestream comment section exploding with questions. "You might want to check the feed, Darius," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "I think the whole world just heard you claim your brother's wife's baby." Darius looked at the phone, then at me. The hatred in his eyes was absolute, but it was too late. The ambulance sirens were already wailing in the distance, coming to collect the mistress he had just exposed. The party was over, but my revenge was just getting started. The drive to the hospital was a surreal experience. I drove my own car, trailing behind the ambulance that carried my husband and his mistress. When I arrived at the emergency room, the scene was chaotic. Tiffany was being wheeled through the double doors, still screaming about her baby. Darius was running alongside the gurney, holding her hand, his face wet with tears that should have been reserved for his wife. He did not look back at me once. I walked into the waiting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and sat down in the hard plastic chair invisible to the man who had promised to love me until death. For the next hour, Darius paced the hallway like a caged animal. He ran his hands through his hair, muttering prayers under his breath. He looked like a man on the edge of a breakdown. Finally, a nurse stepped out and called his name. "Mr. King. The doctor needs to speak with you about the patient's insurance details immediately." Darius looked panicked. He patted his pockets, realized he had left his wallet in his jacket, and threw the suit jacket onto the chair right next to me. "Watch this," he barked at me, not waiting for an answer before sprinting after the nurse. This was it. The universe was handing me the final nail for his coffin. I waited until he turned the corner. Then I reached into his jacket pocket. My fingers closed around his sleek smartphone. I pulled it out, shielding it with my purse. I woke the screen. It asked for a passcode. I didn't hesitate. I typed in 1985, the same code as the safe. The phone unlocked instantly. I went straight to his messages. There was a pinned conversation at the top labeled T-Mobile support. I opened it. It was not customer service. It was Tiffany. The thread went back months. I scrolled rapidly, my eyes scanning the hateful words. There were photos of them in bed together in my house. There were jokes about my weight. But then I found what I really needed. There were texts from last week. "Tiffany, did she take the purple pill?" Darius watched her swallow it. "The doctor says her kidneys will shut down by Saturday." Tiffany. "Good. I want that insurance money in our account before my twins arrive." My hands shook, but I forced them to be steady. I hit select all. Then I typed in the number for Arthur Vance, my father's old law partner and the only attorney in Atlanta I trusted. I hit forward. The progress bar seemed to crawl. I watched the door, terrified Darius would reappear. 90%, 95, sent. I quickly deleted the message from the sent folder so Darius wouldn't see it. I did the same thing with his email, forwarding the PDF of the forged insurance policy to my encrypted cloud account. Just as the screen went black, I heard heavy footsteps approaching. I slid the phone back into his jacket pocket and picked up a magazine, my heart hammering against my ribs. Darius collapsed into the chair next to me, burying his face in his hands. "They are rushing her into surgery," he sobbed. "They might lose the twins." I reached out and patted his back, my touch light and cold. "I am sure everything will happen exactly as it is meant to, Darius," I said softly. He nodded, thinking I was offering comfort. He had no idea I was talking about justice. The evidence was now in the hands of a shark who hated him almost as much as I did. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for it to snap shut. I left Darius weeping into his hands in the waiting room, claiming I needed to find a vending machine. In reality, I was heading to the 4th floor to meet the only ally I had left in this building. Dr. Helen Wu was waiting for me in a small, dimly lit on-call room. Her face was grim, the expression of a woman who had seen too much. She held a tablet in her hands, her knuckles white from gripping it so hard. "Sit down, Brianna," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We do not have much time before Darius comes looking for you." I sat on the edge of the sterile bed. "Is Tiffany okay?" I asked. "She is stable," Helen replied curtly. "The bleeding has stopped. But that is not why I called you up here." She tapped the screen and turned the tablet toward me. I looked at the digital document. It was a prenatal genetic report. I saw the name at the top. Patient Jane Doe. "She came to my private clinic 2 weeks ago paying cash using a fake name," Helen explained. "She thought she was being clever. She did not know I was your doctor, too. She requested a rush amniocentesis. She wanted to be sure of the paternity before she made any permanent decisions." I looked at the results. Probability of paternity 99.9%. The alleged father was listed as Darius King. I had known it, felt it, and heard it, but seeing it in black and white medical font hit me like a physical blow. The biology was undeniable. My husband had created life with the woman who was trying to end mine. "But that is not the headline," Helen said, swiping to the next image. "Look at the ultrasound scan from today." I squinted at the grainy black and white image. I saw the familiar shape of a fetus. But then right next to it I saw another one. "Twins," I whispered, the air leaving my lungs. "Identical twin boys," Helen confirmed. Suddenly the math in my head clicked into a terrifying focus. The $5 million policy, the foreclosure timeline, the urgency. Darius was not just in debt. He was preparing to support a family that had just doubled in size. He needed a mansion, nannies, and a trust fund for 2 sons, not just one. My death was not just about survival for him anymore. It was about funding a dynasty. "He needs double the money," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "He needs $5 million because he has 2 heirs on the way. My son is just an obstacle. These twins are his legacy." Helen took the tablet back. "Brianna, you cannot go back to that house. It is suicide." I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "I have to go back, Helen. If I leave now, he gets suspicious. He runs. I need him to think he is winning until the very last second. I need him to sign the papers thinking he is tricking me." I walked out of the room before she could stop me. The elevator ride back down to the waiting room felt like descending into hell. I walked back to where Darius was sitting. He looked up, his eyes red and puffy. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice cracking. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the father of my child and the father of his brother's wife's twins. I saw a man so greedy he would burn down his own house to warm his hands. "She is fine, Darius," I lied smoothly. "And the babies are fine too." He froze. "Babies. Plural." I smiled a cold, dead smile. I heard the nurses talking. "Twins. Congratulations, Uncle Darius. You must be so proud of your brother." He turned pale, realizing that the stakes had just been raised. He did not know that I knew he was the father. He just knew that I knew there were two of them. And that meant he needed me dead twice as fast. But he did not know that I was already rewriting the ending of his story. I drove back to the empty house, leaving my husband to mourn the near loss of his mistress's pregnancy. The silence in the hallway felt heavy, but for the first time I did not feel alone. I felt armed. I went straight to Darius's home office. I knew he would not be back for hours. He was too busy playing the concerned father at the hospital. I sat down at his sleek iMac and woke the screen. I did not even have to guess the password. It was 1985. He was a creature of habit, and that habit was going to be his downfall. I navigated to his email outbox, looking for the threads he had tried to hide. I found a folder labeled Project Rebrand. I clicked it open, expecting to find real estate brochures or construction plans. Instead, what I saw made my stomach turn over in a way the poison never had. It was a marketing deck sent to a high-end branding agency in New York. The subject line read, "The New Face of King Baby." I opened the attachment. It was a 50-page business plan for a luxury children's clothing line called Royal K. The mission statement was nauseating. It talked about bringing a modern, diverse aesthetic to high society. But as I scrolled down to the visual mood boards, the true nature of his plan became sickeningly clear. There were no pictures of black babies that looked like me or the son I was carrying. Every single image on the mood board featured racially ambiguous light-skinned children with loose curls and hazel eyes. The notes in the margins, written in Darius's own handwriting, were explicit. He wrote that the market pays a premium for the mixed-race aesthetic. He noted that Tiffany's twins would provide the perfect bridge demographic to appeal to both black and white wealthy consumers. He was not just replacing me, he was erasing me. He had decided that our fully black child was not marketable enough for his new empire. He wanted the exotic look of his brother's wife's children to sell organic cotton onesies. I clicked on the next slide. It was a timeline. Phase 1 was listed as the sympathy launch. It detailed a media campaign focused on a grieving father rebuilding his life after a tragic loss, finding hope through his new nephews. He had scripted my death as a marketing hook. He planned to use my funeral as a press release. He would play the widower to gain public sympathy, then launch the brand using Tiffany's twins as the symbol of his resilience. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. The level of calculation was sociopathic. He did not love Tiffany. He did not love the twins. He loved what they could do for his brand. He saw human beings as commodities. I downloaded the entire presentation and forwarded it to my encrypted server. I also sent a copy to Tiffany's email address, scheduling it to arrive in exactly 48 hours. Let her see that she was just a broodmare for his business plan. But I was not done. I opened his calendar and saw a meeting set for tomorrow morning with the bank to finalize the loan for this new venture. He needed my life insurance money to secure that loan. Well, he was about to get a very different kind of meeting. I shut down the computer and stood up. It was time to make the call that would burn his entire kingdom to the ground. I sat in the driver's seat of my car parked in the shadowed corner of the hospital garage, and for 10 minutes I allowed myself to break. I sobbed for the husband I thought I had. I wept for the father my son deserved, but would never know. I cried for the naive girl who thought love was enough to protect her from wolves. The tears were hot and angry, washing away the last layers of denial. But as the digital clock on the dashboard ticked over to the next hour, I wiped my face with the back of my hand. That was it. The last tear. Brianna, the victim, died in this parking lot. Brianna, the predator, was taking the wheel. I reached into the hidden compartment of my purse and pulled out a burner phone, a device Darius knew nothing about. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago, but hoped I would never have to use. It rang once. Julian, my family's longtime asset manager and the only man who knew the true extent of my wealth, answered immediately. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice crisp and professional. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "It is time, Julian," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. It was devoid of emotion. It was purely transactional. Initiate Protocol, Phoenix. There was a pause on the other end. Julian knew exactly what that meant. It was the nuclear option, a strategy designed for total hostile takeover. "Are you sure, Brianna?" he asked cautiously. "Once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. We will be acquiring high-risk, toxic debt. It is aggressive. It is financial warfare. I want it all," I commanded, staring at the concrete wall in front of me. "I want every loan, every credit line, every mortgage. Contact the shadow lenders holding his gambling debts. Offer them 60 cents on the dollar for immediate cash settlement. They will take it because they think he is insolvent. Buy the note on the house. Buy the construction loans for his new development. By tomorrow morning, I want to be the only person Darius King owes money to in this world." "Understood," Julian replied, the rapid clicking of a mechanical keyboard audible in the background. "I can have the paperwork ready for the transfer by 9 in the morning. I see here that he has a meeting scheduled with First National Bank to attempt a refinance. We will intercept the bank's position before he even walks in the door." "Do it," I said. "And Julian, make sure the holding company name is vague. Use the shell corporation, BK Ventures. I want him to walk into that boardroom thinking he is being saved by a faceless investor, only to realize he has walked into a slaughterhouse." I hung up the phone and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror one last time. My eyes were red, but my jaw was set like stone. Darius wanted to erase me. He wanted to turn my life into a marketing campaign for his mistress's children. He thought he was playing chess, moving pieces around the board to checkmate me. He did not realize that I had just bought the board, the pieces, and the table he was playing on. I started the engine. The roar of the motor sounded like a war cry. I was going home to make him dinner one last time. After all, a man should have a good meal before his execution. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, summoning every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I needed to look like a dying woman. I rubbed my eyes until they were red and irritated. I messed up my hair and walked with a stoop, dragging my feet. When I opened the front door, the house was quiet. Darius was in the living room, pouring himself a drink, likely celebrating his successful day of deception. He looked up, startled by my appearance. "Brianna," he said, putting the glass down. "You look terrible." I clutched the door frame, letting my knees buckle slightly. "I feel heavy, Darius," I whispered, my voice trembling. "My head is spinning. I think the doctor was right. My body is shutting down." Darius rushed over, guiding me to the sofa. His touch was solicitous, but his eyes were scanning me, looking for the signs of the poison taking hold. He was looking for yellowing skin, for tremors. I gave him a slight tremor in my hand as I reached for his. "I am scared, Darius," I said, looking into his treacherous eyes. "If something happens to me during the birth, I need to know that you and our son will be taken care of." "Shh, do not talk like that," he said, smoothing my hair. "You are going to be fine." "No," I insisted, squeezing his hand. "I am realistic. I have significant assets, Darius. The trust fund, the properties. If I die without a will, it gets tied up in probate for years. I want you to have access to everything immediately, to take care of the baby, and to take care of yourself." The word assets acted like a shot of adrenaline. His pupils dilated. He was trying to suppress a smile, but the corners of his mouth twitched. "Well, if it gives you peace of mind, babe, we can handle that," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, responsible tone. "I just want you to be calm." "I need to do it now," I rasped. "While I am still lucid, can we call your lawyer?" "I trust him." Darius nodded eagerly. "Of course. I will call Richard right now. He can be here in an hour." He sprang up, practically running to the kitchen to make the call. I lay back on the cushions, listening to his muffled, excited voice in the other room. He was telling his accomplice to bring the standard spousal transfer papers. He thought he was about to sign the deal of a lifetime. He thought I was handing him the keys to the kingdom on a silver platter. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. He was so blinded by greed. He did not ask why I suddenly wanted to change my will at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. He did not ask why I was not at the hospital with his sister-in-law. He just heard money and came running. When Richard arrived, they would be walking into a legal bear trap so tight they would never pry themselves free. I just had to keep breathing, keep trembling, and wait for the pen to hit the paper. Richard arrived 20 minutes later with a leather briefcase and the stench of cheap cologne. He was Darius's college roommate, a lawyer who specialized in cutting corners and helping wealthy men hide their assets during divorces. He looked at me with mock sympathy, but I could see him eyeing the expensive art on the walls, calculating his cut. I lay on the chaise lounge, clutching a handkerchief, playing the part of the fading wife to perfection. "Here is the draft," I whispered, pointing to the thick document on the coffee table. I used an online template, but I attached the full schedule of my separate assets. "I want you to see what you will be managing, Darius." Darius sat down and flipped open the folder. He skipped the legal text entirely and went straight to the financial addendum at the back. I watched his pupils dilate. He was expecting the house and maybe a modest savings account. Instead, he was looking at a list of blind trusts, offshore holding companies, and diversified stock portfolios that Julian and I had built over a decade. The bottom line was not in the thousands, it was in the tens of millions. "Bree." He stammered, his hand shaking slightly as he held the paper. "I had no idea." "I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary," I lied, forcing a cough. "But now I just want to know you and the baby are secure. Please, Darius, just sign it. Take the burden off me." Richard glanced at the papers. "It looks like a standard universal transfer, Darius. She is naming you sole beneficiary and executor. It gives you immediate power of attorney. You should sign before she changes her mind." Richard chuckled, thinking he was being witty. Darius did not hesitate. He did not read a single sentence of the actual will. He was blinded by the zeros on the asset sheet. He grabbed the Mont Blanc pen from Richard's hand and scribbled his signature on the dotted line. He pressed down so hard, the tip almost tore the paper. I closed my eyes, hiding the triumph burning in them. He had just signed the wolf in sheep's clothing document. He missed the fine print in Article 9, Section C. It was a morality clause my father had insisted on years ago. It stated clearly that all beneficiary rights were null and void if the spouse was proven to have fathered a child out of wedlock or committed adultery. But the trap was even sweeter. By signing as the unlimited executor, he had also signed the liability assumption rider. It meant that while he lost the assets due to his infidelity, he had just legally, personally guaranteed every single debt I owed. And thanks to my call to Julian, I now owed millions in toxic loans. Darius thought he had just become a king. In reality, he had just volunteered to be a pauper. "Thank you, honey," I whispered, watching him put the pen down. "Now I can rest." "You rest, babe," Darius said, closing the folder and practically drooling over it. "I will take care of everything." He certainly would. He had just taken care of his own destruction. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house shifted from tense to celebratory. Tiffany had been discharged from the hospital, miraculously keeping her pregnancy intact, despite the chaos she caused at the party. She lay on my living room sofa like a conquering queen, her feet propped up on the coffee table, flipping through a stack of Architectural Digest magazines. Darius sat beside her, rubbing her ankles, looking like a man who had just won the lottery. He had no idea the ticket he was holding was a subpoena in disguise. I stayed in my room watching them through the camera feed on my phone. They thought I was asleep, sedated by the crushing weight of my impending death. Their voices carried up the stairs, loud and reckless. "So when can we start the renovations?" Tiffany asked, circling something on a page with a red marker. "I cannot raise 2 babies in this dated mausoleum. It smells like old money and desperation." Darius laughed, kissing her hand. "Soon, babe. The doctor said her vitals are dropping. Once the funeral is over and the insurance clears, we will gut the place. You can hire that contractor you like." Tiffany sat up, her eyes gleaming. "I was thinking we should start with the nursery. That blue color she picked is hideous. It is so pedestrian. I want to paint over it immediately. Maybe a soft cream or a pale gold. Something that screams royalty for our twins. My hand tightened around the phone. The nursery was the one room I had poured my soul into. I had hand-painted the mural of the night sky on the ceiling. I had restored the antique crib my father slept in. And now this woman wanted to whitewash my love to make room for her ambition. I watched on the screen as they stood up and walked down the hall toward the nursery. I switched the feed to the camera I had hidden in the teddy bear on the bookshelf. They walked in, and Tiffany immediately started critiquing everything. "We need to burn this rug," she said, kicking the hand-woven wool rug I had bought in Morocco. "And that crib, it looks like firewood. We need modern, sleek lines. We need to erase any trace that she was ever planning a life here." Darius hugged her from behind his hands, resting on her stomach. "It will be perfect, Tiff. Just you, me, and the boys. Brianna will just be a memory. A sad story we tell people to explain why we are so rich." They kissed right there in the middle of my son's room. It was the ultimate desecration. They were not just planning a renovation, they were planning an erasure. They wanted to paint over my existence. I turned off the phone, a cold calm settling over me. They wanted to change the locks and paint the walls. But they forgot one thing. You do not renovate a house when the landlord is about to evict you. I looked at the clock. It was time for Darius to go to his meeting. It was time for him to find out that the only thing getting painted today was a target on his back. The following morning, Darius stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom, adjusting his silk tie with the precision of a surgeon. He looked at me lying in bed, feigning weakness, and flashed a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. "I have a big meeting today, babe," he said, checking his Rolex. "A new investor group, BK Ventures, is looking to buy out my debt and inject capital into the new project. This is the fresh start we need." I managed a weak nod. "Good luck, Darius," I whispered. "I hope they give you exactly what you deserve." He chuckled, taking that as a compliment, and strode out of the room. He had no idea that BK Ventures stood for Brianna King Ventures. He had no idea that the shark he was going to swim with was the wife he had left in bed. As soon as his car left the driveway, I threw off the covers. I had to get to the office before he did. I took the back roads entering the building through the private service elevator that only the building owners knew about. My father had built this skyscraper, and he had installed a few secrets that Darius never bothered to learn. I watched from the security feed in the adjacent room as Darius strutted into the lobby of King Development. He barked an order at the receptionist, ignoring the terrified look on her face. He did not notice that the company logo in the lobby was already being removed by a maintenance crew. He was too focused on his salvation. He took the elevator to the top floor, rehearsing his pitch. He needed this money to pay off the loan sharks by noon, or things would get violent. Darius pushed open the heavy double doors of the main conference room. The room was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline he so desperately wanted to conquer. But the room was empty of his usual sycophants. There was no board of directors, no lawyers, just a single high-backed leather executive chair at the head of the long mahogany table. The chair was swiveled around, facing the window, its high back blocking his view of the occupant. "Mr. King, please come in," I said, using a voice modulator I had placed on the desk to deepen my tone. Darius stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He adjusted his jacket, exuding false confidence. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "I assume you are the managing partner of BK Ventures. I have to say your offer to buy out my liabilities came at the perfect time." He walked closer to the table, placing his leather portfolio on the polished wood. "I want to be transparent with you," he continued, pacing slightly. "My company is facing a temporary liquidity issue due to a family tragedy. My wife is terminally ill. We expect a significant insurance payout within the week. I am willing to pledge that payout as collateral for this bridge loan." I sat in the chair, listening to him pawn off my death like a used car. The coldness in my chest turned to ice. He was not just a murderer. He was a salesman of death. "Excellent," the voice modulator boomed. "But we have done our due diligence, Mr. King. We found some discrepancies in your ownership documents. Darius laughed nervously. Impossible. I have full power of attorney. My wife signed everything over to me just last night. The company is mine. Is it? I asked, my finger hovering over the button to spin the chair. Or is it just another thing you stole? Darius stopped pacing. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Who are you? He demanded, his voice losing its polish. Turn around. I took a deep breath. It was time. I spun the chair slowly. The leather chair completed its rotation, revealing the person holding the gavel. It was not a faceless banker from New York. It was me. But I was not the pale, trembling woman he had left in bed 2 hours ago. I was wearing a tailored crimson power suit that cost more than his car. My hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun, and my makeup was sharp enough to cut glass. I sat with my legs crossed, staring at him, with eyes that held zero affection and infinite power. Hello, Darius, I said, my voice steady and commanding. You look like you have seen a ghost. Darius stumbled back, his portfolio slipping from his sweaty hands and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Bree? He stammered, blinking rapidly. What is this? Why are you here? You are supposed to be in bed. You are sick. I stood up, smoothing the lapels of my jacket. I am feeling much better, actually. It is amazing what happens when you stop taking the poison your husband has been feeding you. He froze, his face draining of all color. I walked to the edge of the table, enjoying the way he shrank away from me. As for BK Ventures, surely a smart businessman like you can figure out the acronym. Brianna King. I bought your debt, Darius. I bought the construction loans, the mortgage, and the personal notes you signed with those very dangerous men in Vegas. I own this building. I own this company. And as the sole proprietor, I have made my first executive decision. I slammed a single piece of paper onto the mahogany table. It was a termination notice. You are fired, Darius. Effective immediately. You are to vacate the premises. You have zero equity. You have zero severance. And thanks to the liability clause you signed last night, you now personally owe me $12 million. For a moment, silence hung in the room. Then a low, guttural sound bubbled up from his throat. He started to laugh. It was a manic, jagged sound. This is a joke, right? He wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. You almost got me. Is this some kind of pregnancy hormone thing? You cannot fire me, Brianna. I built this place. You are just a housewife with a trust fund. You are delusional. Go home and take a nap before you hurt yourself. He reached for the phone on the table, his arrogance acting as a shield against reality. I am calling security to take you home. You are hysterical. I smiled a cold, predatory smile. I already called them, but not for me. 2 massive security guardsmen I had personally hired that morning to replace his cronies stepped out from the shadows of the corner office. They grabbed Darius by the arms before he could touch the receiver. Get your hands off me, he screamed, kicking and thrashing as they hauled him toward the door. I am the CEO. She is crazy. She is dying. Do you know who I am? I watched him being dragged out, his heels scraping against the expensive carpet he no longer owned. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I simply picked up his portfolio, tossed it into the trash can, and sat back down in my chair. The view from the top was finally clear. Tiffany stood at the counter of the Gucci flagship store at Phipps Plaza, tapping her freshly manicured nails against the glass case. She had piled up a mountain of merchandise. There were 3 cashmere blankets, a diaper bag that cost more than most people's cars, and matching infant loafers. She was shopping for the heirs to the King dynasty, and she wanted the world to know it. She adjusted her sunglasses, waiting for the sales associate to finish wrapping the items in crisp tissue paper. Put it all on this, Tiffany said, flicking the heavy black Centurion card onto the counter without looking up. She was too busy scrolling through her Instagram, deleting the few negative comments that had popped up after the pool incident. She felt invincible. She had the man, she had the twins, and soon she would have the house. The sales associate, a young woman with a tight ponytail, swiped the card. A sharp, dissonant beep echoed through the quiet boutique. Tiffany ignored it. "I am sorry, ma'am," the associate said softly. "The transaction was declined." Tiffany laughed a sharp, incredulous sound. "Do not be ridiculous. That is an unlimited black card. It does not decline. You probably swiped it wrong. Run it again." The girl nodded and swiped again. The same harsh beep followed. The screen flashed red. "It says do not honor, ma'am." That usually means the issuer has frozen the account for insufficient funds or fraud. Tiffany snatched the card back, her face flushing hot with embarrassment. She could feel the other customers looking at her. "You obviously have a broken machine," she snapped. "Keep the bag behind the counter. I will just call my husband. He probably put a security hold on it because I bought a Rolex earlier." She stormed out of the store onto the sidewalk, the humid Atlanta air hitting her face. She dialed Darius immediately. It rang, and rang, and rang. Then it went straight to voicemail. "Darius, pick up," she hissed into the phone. "The card is not working and I look like an idiot. Call the bank, now." She called again. Nothing. A knot of panic began to tighten in her chest. Darius never ignored her calls. He was obsessed with her. She was about to dial a third time when her phone vibrated with a breaking news alert. It was not a text from Darius. It was a notification from the Atlanta Business Chronicle. The headline made her knees buckle. "Empire crumbles, King development insolvency. Darius King ousted." Her hands shook violently as she clicked the link. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. It showed Darius being physically dragged out of his own headquarters by two security guards. The article was brutal. It stated that a private holding company had called in all of Darius King's debts. It said he had been stripped of his CEO title. It mentioned that his personal assets, including his bank accounts, had been frozen pending a fraud investigation. Tiffany leaned against the brick wall of the mall, struggling to breathe. Frozen assets, insolvency, that meant no money, that meant no renovation, that meant no Europe. She looked down at her swollen belly. She had played the game to win a fortune, thinking she had stolen the king from the queen. But as she stood there on the pavement, penniless and ignored, she realized she hadn't stolen a kingdom. She had stolen a corpse. She was not the mother of heirs anymore. She was the mother of two anchors attached to a drowning man. And the woman she had tried to kill was the one holding the scissors. The tires of Tiffany's Mercedes screeched across the asphalt of the driveway, sounding like a wounded animal. I was sitting in the living room sipping tea from a delicate china cup, waiting for the storm to make landfall. I did not have to wait long. The front door did not just open. It exploded inward, slamming against the wall with a violence that shook the frame. Tiffany stood there, her hair wild, her designer dress stained with sweat and her eyes manic with desperation. She looked like a beauty queen who had just survived a car crash. "You bitch!" she screamed, storming into the room. She grabbed a crystal vase from the entryway table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the fireplace, sending shards of glass skittering across the floor. "You ruined everything. You froze the accounts. You canceled my cards. How dare you?" I placed my teacup down slowly. "I did not ruin anything, Tiffany," I said calmly. "I just stopped paying for your life." She let out a guttural shriek and lunged forward, swiping a stack of books off the coffee table. "You think you are so smart just because your daddy left you some money. But you are nothing. You are just trash wrapped in money you do not deserve. You are ghetto trash, Brianna. That is all you people ever are. You think you can sit there in this big house and pretend to be one of us. But you are not. You are just a placeholder until a real woman came along." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. She called me a monkey in a silk dress. She used slurs that belonged in the 1950s, spitting them out with a venom that revealed the rot in her soul. Mama Louise, who had been in the kitchen, ran into the room. "Tiffany, stop it!" she cried out, looking horrified. "What are you saying? That is not how a lady speaks. You are carrying a king baby. Calm down!" Tiffany whipped around, her eyes blazing. She looked at Mama Louise with pure, unadulterated loathing. Shut up, you old hag, Tiffany snapped. Nobody cares about your stupid rules. And nobody cares about your pathetic son. I do not want to be a king. I wanted the money. I wanted the trips to Paris. I wanted the life she has. Mama Louise froze. She looked as if she had been slapped. But Tiffany, she stammered. I thought you loved Darius. I thought you loved me. You said I was like a mother to you. Tiffany laughed a cruel, mocking sound. I tolerated you, Louise. I ate your nasty cooking and listened to your boring stories because I thought you came with a checkbook. But if there is no money, then you are just a suffocating, annoying old woman. Get out of my face. She turned back to me, panting heavily. Fix it, Brianna. Call the bank. Unfreeze the cards. Or I swear to God I will burn this house down with you inside it. I stood up slowly. I did not flinch at her threats. I looked at the broken glass, then at the broken old woman trembling in the corner, and finally at the monster standing in the center of my living room. You can try Tiffany, I said softly. But I think you will find that the only thing burning down today is you. And as for you, Louise, I think you just met the real Tiffany. I hope she was worth it. The air in the living room was thick with violence, vibrating with the energy of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Tiffany stood amidst the shattered glass of the vase she had thrown, her chest heaving, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. She looked at me standing calm and composed in my crimson suit, and then she looked at the silver fruit bowl on the coffee table. A small, sharp paring knife sat next to a half-eaten apple. I saw the decision form in her eyes a split second before her body moved. She did not scream this time. She just moved with a silent, deadly intent. She lunged forward, snatching the knife with her right hand, and charged at me. The blade was aimed directly at my chest. Mama Louise screamed, covering her eyes. I did not run. I did not flinch. Years ago, after my father passed, I had channeled my grief into discipline. I spent 3 years in self-defense classes, learning exactly how to handle someone bigger, stronger, or armed. As Tiffany closed the distance, the world seemed to slow down. I waited until she was within striking range. When she thrust the knife forward, I stepped sharply to the left, letting her momentum carry her past me. My left hand shot out, clamping around her wrist with a grip of iron. I twisted her arm outward, forcing the joint against its natural range of motion. Tiffany shrieked in pain, her fingers involuntarily springing open. The knife clattered harmlessly onto the hardwood floor. I did not let go. I used her own weight against her, pivoting my hips and driving my shoulder into her back. I swept her legs out from under her and slammed her face first onto the plush velvet sofa. I pinned her arm behind her back, leaning close to her ear. That was a mistake, Tiffany. I whispered, my voice barely audible over her sobbing. You just tried to kill the person who owns the roof over your head. Before she could struggle free, the front door burst open. Blue and red lights flashed against the living room walls, illuminating the wreckage. Police officers, weapons drawn, poured into the hallway. I had triggered the silent panic alarm on my phone the moment her car had screeched into the driveway. Drop the weapon, an officer shouted, seeing the knife on the floor. I stepped back, releasing Tiffany, and raised my hands slowly. She is unarmed, officer, I said, my voice shaking with a perfectly manufactured fear. She just attacked me. I had to restrain her. Tiffany scrambled off the sofa, holding her wrist. She attacked me, she lied, tears streaming down her face. She is crazy. She stole my money. The lead officer looked at the broken glass, the knife on the floor, and the terrified old woman in the corner. Then he looked at me, the composed homeowner, and Tiffany, the disheveled intruder. Ma'am, step away from the resident, the officer ordered Tiffany. They did not arrest her, not yet. I declined to press charges for attempted murder, playing the role of the compassionate sister-in-law. Instead, they issued an immediate emergency restraining order. As they escorted Tiffany out, warning her that one more step onto my property would result in a felony arrest, I watched from the doorway. She was not in handcuffs, but she was in a prison of her own making. She was banned from the house, banned from the money, and banned from the family. And I knew that a desperate rat, when cornered and kicked out, would always try to come back for one last bite. I was counting on it. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers had barely faded into the night when the first contraction hit me. It was not a cramp. It was a vice grip tightening around my lower spine, squeezing the air from my lungs. I grabbed the edge of the sofa, my knuckles turning white. I had held it together through the poison, the betrayal, and the physical assault, but my body had reached its breaking point. The stress of the fight with Tiffany had triggered the one thing I was not ready for. A warm, wet sensation flooded down my legs, soaking the crimson fabric of my power suit. My water had broken. I was 2 weeks early. I did not panic. I could not afford to. I reached for my phone and dialed the private line for the hospital, bypassing the emergency room chaos. "I am coming in," I told the nurse on the other end. "Prepare the suite and alert security. No one named King is allowed on the floor." As the ambulance wailed toward the hospital, carrying me away from the wreckage of my marriage, a notification pinged on a phone across town. In a grimy motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation, Darius King was sitting on the edge of a stained mattress. He was watching the live feed from our front door security camera on his phone. He saw the paramedics wheeling me out. He saw the grimace of pain on my face. A twisted, terrifying smile spread across his face. He did not see his wife in pain. He did not see his son coming into the world. He saw a loophole. He saw a second chance. He grabbed the crumpled insurance policy from his bag. He read the clause again. Double indemnity for death due to childbirth complications. If I died tonight on that table, the investigation would be brief. They would blame it on the stress. They would blame it on eclampsia. He would get the $5 million. He could pay off the debt I had bought. He could sue for the estate. He could win. He did not know about the will I had signed the night before. He did not know that his signature on that document had stripped him of everything. He was operating on old intelligence. He thought he was still the beneficiary. Darius stood up, splashing cold water on his face. He put on a fresh shirt, hiding the stains of his failure. He grabbed a heavy metal flask and slipped it into his pocket, but he was not planning to drink from it. He needed a weapon of opportunity. He checked his reflection in the cracked mirror. He practiced his grieving husband face. He had to get to that delivery room. He had to make sure that only one person left that room alive. He grabbed his car keys and bolted out the door. The race was on. I was fighting to bring a life into the world, and he was speeding down the highway to take one out. Darius parked the nondescript rental car 3 blocks away from the hospital entrance, hidden in the shadows of a concrete underpass. He pulled the stolen blue maintenance jumpsuit over his expensive dress shirt and slacks. It smelled faintly of bleach and stale sweat, a perfect olfactory camouflage for a man trying to disappear. He pulled a stained baseball cap low over his eyes and grabbed a yellow mop bucket he had swiped from the loading dock earlier. He was no longer the disgraced CEO of King Development. He was just a ghost in the machine, invisible to the people who only saw uniforms, not faces. He entered through the service elevators near the cafeteria, keeping his head down and his posture slumped. He moved with a practiced rhythmic shuffle, pushing the squeaky bucket across the linoleum floors. His heart was hammering against his ribs, not with fear, but with an adrenaline-fueled excitement. This was the endgame. This was how he won back his kingdom. He just needed 5 minutes alone in that room. He reached the maternity ward on the 4th floor. The hallway was dim lit only by the low night lights and the soft glow of the nurse's station at the far end. He waited until the nurse on duty was distracted by a phone call, then he slipped into the unlocked electrical closet near the east wing. He knew the layout of this building intimately because his company had renovated this wing 5 years ago. He located the bundle of cables labeled Security Feed B and used a pair of heavy-duty wire cutters to sever the connection. In the hallway, the red recording lights on the ceiling-mounted cameras blinked out. Darius smiled in the dark. He had just created a blind spot, a black hole where no evidence could exist. He believed he was a genius. He believed he had thought of everything. He stepped back out, moving quickly now. He reached into the deep pocket of his jumpsuit, and his fingers closed around the cold plastic of the syringe. It was filled with a concentrated dose of potassium chloride. He had stolen it from a veterinary supply contact weeks ago. It was a brutal, efficient weapon. When injected directly into an IV stream, it would stop the heart, instantly mimicking a massive cardiac arrest. In a woman suffering from severe preeclampsia and labor stress, no one would question it. It would look like a tragedy, not a murder. He found room 402. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open silently and slipped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the rhythmic green pulse of the heart monitor. Bree was lying in the bed, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. She looked weak. She looked vulnerable. Darius crept to the side of the bed, his eyes fixed on the IV bag hanging above her head. He uncapped the syringe, his hand steady. "Goodbye, babe," he whispered, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "Thanks for the money." He raised the needle toward the injection port. He was so focused on his victory that he did not notice the small black object hidden inside the smoke detector directly above him. He did not know that the camera feed he had cut in the hallway was just a decoy. Inside this room, a high-definition police surveillance lens was recording every breath, every movement, and the lethal weapon in his hand. He thought he was the hunter, but he was the rat standing in the center of the trap, and the cage door had just slammed shut. The only sound in the dimly lit recovery room was the steady rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. To anyone else it was the sound of life, but to the man standing over my bed, it was a countdown clock he was desperate to silence. I lay perfectly still, my eyes closed, my breathing shallow and even. I was mimicking the exhaustion of a new mother, heavily sedated after a traumatic birth. In reality, every nerve ending in my body was on fire. I was not asleep, I was hunting. I felt the mattress dip slightly as Darius leaned against the bed rail. The smell of bleach and industrial soap wafted off him, a poor attempt to mask the scent of his own fear. I felt his gloved hand brush a stray lock of hair from my forehead. It was a gesture that might have looked tender to a casual observer, but to me it felt like a spider crawling across my skin. He was inspecting his work. He was preparing to finish what the stress and the poison had failed to do. I heard the faint, sharp click of the syringe cap being removed. My heart rate spiked involuntarily, but I forced my breathing to remain slow. I could not give him a reason to hesitate. I needed him to commit. I needed the intent to be undeniable. Darius leaned down, his face so close to mine that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "You look so peaceful, Bree," he whispered, his voice trembling with a sick manic energy. "It is almost a shame. You really made this difficult, you know that. Freezing the accounts, taking the building. You humiliated me today." He paused, and I felt the cold plastic tip of the syringe press against the rubber injection port of my IV line. This was the moment. He was connecting the weapon to my bloodstream. "You really thought you had won?" He hissed, the venom in his voice dripping like acid. "You thought you could just sign a piece of paper and erase me. But you forgot one thing. I am a survivor. I do what needs to be done." His thumb rested on the plunger. He was savoring it. He was enjoying the power. "You are smart, Brianna. I always gave you that. You are the smartest woman I know." He leaned even closer, his lips brushing against my ear, delivering his final verdict. "But you have to die so I can live. It is nothing personal. It is just business. The insurance money is the only way out for me, so do me a favor and go quietly." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the murder. He thought he was whispering to a dying woman. He had no idea he was confessing to a high-definition microphone hidden in the smoke detector above his head. He thought he was the executioner. He did not know he was the one standing on the gallows. The plunger went down. I felt the vibration travel through the plastic tubing taped to the back of my hand, a cold echo of his intent. Darius pushed the entire contents of the syringe into the port, his knuckles white with the force of his desperation. He did not hesitate. He did not shake. He simply emptied the weapon into what he thought was my bloodstream, believing he was flushing away his debts with every milliliter of potassium chloride. I held my breath, counting the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. I had arranged everything with the charge nurse, a woman whose sister had been ruined by a man like Darius. The IV line running under the sheets was not connected to my vein. It was taped to the side of the mattress, feeding into a waste bag hidden beneath the bed frame. But Darius did not check the site. He was too focused on the machine. On cue, the heart monitor above my head faltered. The rhythmic, reassuring beep became erratic, skipping beats in a chaotic dance. Then, with a final digital gasp, it smoothed out into a single high-pitched tone. The flat line. The sound of death. It pierced the silence of the room, a sharp, unyielding scream that signaled the end of a life. I went completely limp, letting my head loll to the side, my mouth slightly open. I focused on slowing my own pulse, willing myself to be a corpse. I could feel Darius freeze. He was waiting. He was watching my chest, looking for the rise and fall of breath that would prove him a failure. I gave him nothing. I became the empty vessel he wanted me to be. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the drone of the machine. Then I heard a sound that chilled me more than the poison ever could. Darius exhaled. It was a long, shuddering sigh of pure, unadulterated relief. He chuckled, a low, wet sound that bubbled up from his throat. Finally, he whispered, stepping back from the bed. "It is done." He reached up and grabbed the brim of his stained baseball cap, tossing it onto the floor. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he hooked his finger under the blue surgical mask covering his face. He pulled it down, exposing his features to the cool air of the hospital room. He wanted to breathe freely. He wanted to look at his work with his own eyes, unencumbered by a disguise. He smiled. It was a wide, terrifying grin that reached his eyes. He looked at my still body, not with remorse but with pride. He ran a hand through his sweaty hair, looking like a man who had just scored the winning touchdown, not a man who had just murdered the mother of his child. He turned his face upward, closing his eyes, basking in the silence of the room, unaware that the red light of the smoke detector was capturing every pixel of his victory lap. He was celebrating his freedom, but he had just unmasked himself for the jury. The high-pitched whine of the heart monitor was still drilling into the walls when the heavy door to the suite swung open with a violence that made Darius jump. He spun around, his face still flushed with the euphoria of murder, expecting a nurse rushing in to call the code. He was ready to scream, to cry, to play the role of the devastated husband, discovering his wife had passed. Instead, he found himself staring down the barrel of a reality he was not equipped to handle. Standing in the doorway was not a medical team. It was Arthur Vance, my attorney, holding a thick legal file, flanked by the Atlanta chief of police and two uniformed officers. Darius blinked, his brain misfiring. He tried to compose his face into a mask of grief, assuming they had just arrived at the worst possible moment. He opened his mouth to shout for a doctor to keep up the charade, but the words died in his throat. He saw the look on Arthur's face. It was not sorrow. It was a look of grim, absolute satisfaction. The officers did not look like they were there to offer condolences. They looked like they were there to take out the trash. Then the impossible happened. Behind him, the flatline tone stopped abruptly, not because the machine was turned off by a nurse, but because a hand had reached out and pressed the silence button. The rustle of starched hospital sheets broke the paralysis in the room. Darius turned back toward the bed in slow motion, his eyes widening until they looked like they might burst from his skull. He looked as though he was watching a corpse claw its way out of a grave. I opened my eyes. They were clear, sharp, and very much alive. I sat up slowly, the movement fluid and strong, shedding the facade of the dying victim I had played for weeks. With a calm, deliberate motion, I reached for the IV line taped to the back of my hand. I ripped the medical tape away with a sharp tear, revealing that the needle had never pierced my skin. It had been resting on top of it. I pulled the long plastic tube out from under my armpit, where it had been feeding into a hidden saline bag taped to my side. The lethal dose of potassium chloride he had just injected dripped harmlessly onto the cold linoleum floor. Darius staggered back his legs, hitting the wall for support. He looked from me to the tube, then to the empty syringe still clutched in his hand. He was hyperventilating, his reality fracturing into a million pieces. He was shaking his head, mouthing the word no over and over again. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, smoothing down my gown as if I had just woken up from a refreshing nap. I looked him dead in the eye, the same eyes he thought he had closed forever. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice crisp and echoing in the silent room. "That was a phenomenal performance. I almost believed you really loved me for a second there. But I think the jury is going to be much more interested in the monologue you just delivered to the smoke detector." I pointed a finger toward the ceiling. Darius looked up, seeing the red light blinking inside the plastic casing. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The color drained from his face until he looked more dead than I ever had. The trap had not just sprung, it had crushed him completely. Darius stumbled backward until his back hit the cold, sterile wall of the hospital room. He looked like an animal caught in the high beams of an oncoming truck, his eyes darting frantically between me, the police chief, and the empty syringe he had just dropped on the floor. The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than the lead apron in the X-ray room. It was the silence of a man realizing that the ground beneath his feet was actually a trap door, and the latch had just been pulled. Chief Miller did not offer a polite greeting. He simply nodded to the two officers standing behind him. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of predators taking down wounded prey. Darius tried to scramble sideways, perhaps thinking he could bolt for the door, but he was not built for physical confrontation. He was a man of boardrooms and backstabbing, not brawls. One officer grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around while the other kicked his legs out from under him. Darius hit the linoleum floor with a sickening thud the wind knocked out of him. His cheek was pressed against the cold tiles right next to the puddle of potassium chloride that was supposed to be inside my veins. "Get off me!" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "This is a mistake. She is lying. That is not poison. It is just vitamins. I was giving her vitamins." Arthur Vance. My lawyer stepped forward with a remote control in his hand. He looked down at Darius with the disdain one might reserve for a cockroach. "Save your breath," Mr. King Arthur said, his voice dry and devoid of pity. "We do not need your testimony. We have the director's cut." Arthur pointed the remote at the large flat-screen television mounted on the wall opposite the bed. The screen flickered to life. It was a live feed from the camera hidden in the smoke detector. The image was crystal clear, high-definition evidence broadcast in black and white. On the screen we saw Darius enter the room. We saw him pull down his mask. We saw the sadistic glee on his face as he prepared the syringe. And then the audio filled the room, amplified and undeniable. The sound of his own voice whispering the words that would bury him forever. "May thông minh lắm, nhưng mày vẫn phải chết để tao sống." The recording continued. "The insurance money is the only way out for me." Darius stopped struggling. He stared up at the screen, watching himself commit attempted murder. He watched himself confess to the motive. He watched himself smile as the heart monitor flatlined. There was no spinning this. There was no context to add. It was the raw, unfiltered portrait of a sociopath. The officer on the right grabbed Darius's wrists and wrenched them behind his back. The metallic ratchet of the handcuffs tightening echoed through the room. It was a final, definitive sound. The click of the lock was the period at the end of his sentence. "No," Darius screamed, the reality finally piercing his delusion. "No, you do not understand. It wasn't me. It was her. It was Tiffany." He began to thrash against the floor, saliva flying from his mouth as his facade completely disintegrated. The suave businessman was gone. In his place was a sniveling coward desperate to trade anyone for his own survival. "She made me do it," he howled, looking up at Chief Miller with wild, pleading eyes. She is the one who wanted the money. She is the one who found the supplier for the chemical. She told me she wouldn't let me see the twins if I didn't get rid of Bree. I was brainwashed. I am a victim here. She is the mastermind. Go arrest her. Check her phone. Check her texts. I have the messages. She planned the whole thing. I sat on the edge of the bed, swinging my legs, watching him self-destruct. It was pathetic. He was throwing the mother of his new children to the wolves without a second of hesitation. He was willing to send Tiffany to prison for life if it meant he could shave a few years off his own sentence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You really are a piece of work, Darius," I said softly, my voice cutting through his screaming. "You are not a victim. You are just a man who gambled everything on a pair of threes and lost to a royal flush. And do not worry about Tiffany. We have the texts. I sent them to the police myself yesterday. You are both going down. You just happen to be the one going down for attempted capital murder." The officer hauled Darius to his feet. He looked small now. The expensive suit was rumpled. His hair was a mess, and his face was a mask of terror. He looked at me one last time, searching for any trace of the woman who used to love him, the woman who used to forgive him. He found only a stranger in a hospital gown, looking at him with eyes as cold as the grave he tried to put her in. "Bree, please," he whimpered, tears streaming down his face. "I am the father of your son. Do not let them take me. Who will raise him?" I stood up and walked over to him, stopping just inches from his face. "I will raise him, Darius. I will raise him to be a man, which means he will be nothing like you." I nodded to the officers. "Get him out of my sight." They dragged him toward the door. He was sobbing now, a broken, incoherent mess, still shouting Tiffany's name, still trying to blame the world for his own greed. The door swung shut behind them, cutting off his screams. The room fell silent again. I looked at the TV screen where the image of Darius was frozen in a loop, smiling at his own cleverness. I picked up the remote and turned it off. The screen went black. The show was over. The villain had exited stage left, and for the first time in months, I took a breath that felt entirely my own. The fallout from Darius's confession was swift and absolute. While I was holding my newborn son for the first time, Tiffany was standing in the international terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, clutching a one-way ticket to Paris. She wore oversized sunglasses and a trench coat, trying to look like a tourist rather than a fugitive accomplice to attempted murder. She tapped her foot nervously, checking the departure board, believing she had outsmarted everyone. She thought she could disappear into the boutiques of Europe and find a new sponsor. But she had underestimated the pettiness of the man she had conspired with. Darius had not just confessed to his own crimes, he had provided the police with a detailed map of Tiffany's involvement to secure a plea deal. He told them about the texts the supplier she found for the chemical and her flight plans. As the boarding call for Air France Flight 682 was announced, two federal agents stepped out from the jet bridge. They did not ask for her autograph. They asked for her wrists. I was told she screamed when they handcuffed her. She shrieked about her rights, about her pregnancy, about how she was a victim of a controlling husband. But the digital paper trail I had forwarded to the district attorney told a different story. It showed a cold, calculating woman who was impatient for my death. She was denied bail. 3 months later, Tiffany went into labor. But there was no luxury suite, no live stream, and no gold banner. She gave birth in the infirmary of the Fulton County Jail, chained to the bed frame. The twins she had planned to use as marketing props were taken from her arms 24 hours later. Because she was facing a 20-year sentence for conspiracy to commit capital murder, the state determined she was unfit. She lost custody before she even had a chance to name them. The legacy she wanted to build had crumbled into a foster care case number. Meanwhile, the collapse of the King Empire hit the matriarch the hardest. Mama Louise was sitting in the parlor of the mansion waiting for Darius to come home and fix everything. She refused to believe the news. She refused to pack. When the sheriff's deputies arrived to execute the foreclosure order I had initiated through BK Ventures, she was still drinking tea in her robe. I am the mother of Darius King, she spat at the officers. You cannot put me out on the street. My son owns this town. The deputy simply handed her the eviction notice. Your son owns nothing, ma'am, he said, and neither do you. The bank owns the house and the new owner wants it vacated by noon. They escorted her out. She left with 2 garbage bags of clothes and a collection of ceramic figurines. No friends came to help her. She had alienated everyone in her social circle with her arrogance. With no assets, no family willing to take her in, and a son facing life in prison, the state intervened. They placed her in a state-funded nursing facility on the outskirts of the city. It was a gray, peeling building that smelled of boiled cabbage and industrial cleaner. There were no private rooms. There were no servants. I visited her once just to make sure the paperwork was finalized. She sat in a wheelchair in the hallway staring at a flickering television, wearing a faded housecoat that wasn't hers. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with confusion and bitterness. She didn't say a word. She finally understood that the silence she had kept while I was being abused was the same silence that would now surround her for the rest of her life. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open, and for the first time in 9 months, I stepped into the sunlight without a shadow hanging over me. The Atlanta heat had broken, replaced by a crisp, clean autumn breeze that felt like a baptism. In my arms, wrapped in a blanket of soft white organic cotton, lay Phoenix Vance. I had given him my father's last name. The name King died in that hospital room with Darius's freedom. My son would not carry the burden of a dynasty built on lies. He would rise from the ashes of the fire I had set to burn it all down. Waiting at the curb was not a chaotic swarm of paparazzi or the fake friends who had populated Tiffany's parties. Instead, a fleet of 3 black SUVs idled in a perfect line. Standing beside them were Arthur Vance Julian and the core executive team of BK Holdings. These were the people who had helped me execute the takeover. They did not cheer. They did not clap. As I approached, they simply straightened their ties and nodded in silent, absolute respect. I was no longer just the wife or the victim. I was the chairman of the board. I nodded back, shielding Phoenix's eyes from the glare, and climbed into the back seat of the lead vehicle. 2 days later, I sat at the long mahogany table in Arthur's conference room. In front of me lay the deed to the mansion. The house where Darius had cheated, where Tiffany had plotted, and where I had almost lost my mind. I picked up the pen and signed my name with a flourish. The house was sold. The buyer was a developer who planned to tear it down, but I did not care about the building. I cared about the check sitting next to the deed. It was a cashier's check for $4 million. Arthur slid it toward me. "Into your trust, Brianna." I shook my head, pushing the check back toward him. "No. Deposit this into the operating account for the new nonprofit, the Phoenix Center for Women. I want it to fund legal aid and safe housing for women trapped in abusive marriages. Every single cent Darius tried to steal from me will now be used to destroy men like him." Arthur smiled, a genuine expression of pride. "Your father would be amazed by you, Bree." I stood up, adjusting my blazer. "I think he would just be glad I finally learned how to fight back." I walked out of the office and down to the parking garage. My driver opened the door and I slid into the leather interior, feeling a profound sense of closure. The war was over. The enemies were vanquished. I pulled out my phone to check on the nanny cam I had set up for Phoenix just to see his sleeping face. Suddenly the screen went black. The phone vibrated in my hand, flashing a blocked number. I frowned. Only a handful of people had this private line. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" There was a pause. Then a low, gravelly voice echoed on the line. It was a voice I did not recognize, heavy with the scent of cigars and old violence. "Congratulations on the win, Ms. Vance," the man said. "You handled the mistress and the husband beautifully. A real masterclass in vengeance." "Who is this?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. The man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You were thorough, Brianna. You bought the bank loans. You bought the credit card debt. You even bought the mortgage, but you missed one folder." My stomach dropped. Darius didn't just borrow from banks, the voice continued, dropping an octave. He borrowed from the wrong people in Las Vegas. He owes $3 million to Mr. Sal Moretti. We do not care about your little legal tricks or who owns the company now, we just care about the money. I stayed silent, my heart hammering against my ribs. You acquired his assets, darling, the man whispered. That means you acquired his problems too. We are coming to Atlanta, Brianna. Have the cash ready, or we will take something else you value. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, the silence of the car suddenly feeling like a cage. I looked out the window, and for a split second I saw a black sedan trailing us in the reflection of the glass. The war wasn't over. The battlefield had just gotten bigger. The saga of Brianna King serves as a visceral reminder that in the high-stakes game of life, financial literacy is the ultimate form of self-defense. The story teaches us that blind trust is a dangerous luxury. Real power comes from maintaining agency over your own resources and understanding the fine print of your own life. Bree's victory wasn't secured through physical force, but through strategic patience and emotional discipline. She demonstrates that when you are underestimated, you hold a tactical advantage. Instead of reacting with immediate rage, she gathered intelligence, turning her husband's greed into the very weapon that destroyed him. The most profound takeaway is that you should never let someone else be the sole architect of your future. A partner should be a teammate, not a ruler. Ultimately, Brianna proves that true strength isn't about how loud you scream, but about how silently you can rearrange the board before your enemy even realizes the game has started. The police are gone, but the mafia is just pulling into town. Do you think Bree's legal tricks will work on a Vegas crime lord? Or has she finally met her match? Comment Vegas below. If you want to see Season 2 immediately,